The Gloam-Eyed Queen is an important figure lurking in the depths of Elden Ring's history. She's known to us mostly by reputation, and there aren't many hard facts, but I have a few guesses. She's survived by an artifact, her Godslayer's Greatsword. The name really says it all. The description tells us about her godskin apostles. They channel her power, or perhaps her sword's power, and apparently liked to skin gods. The Queen's sword's name wasn't just aspirational. According to the Noble Presence item description, the Godskin Noble's God Hunt had at least the one trophy, which implies they did successfully hunt down a god or two. I think they managed to kill more than one or two gods. The world may have looked like quite a different place before the Gloam-Eyed Queen and her apostles' rampages. I'd say there were lots of gods all over the place. In the modern day, the Lands Between is a fairly monotheistic place, with Marika at least trying to assert herself as the one true god. But was that always the status quo? Imagine there were many gods, each with their own domains, overlapping and interacting. And when I say domains, I mean conceptually, not geographically. I'm not saying there was one god who ruled in Stormvale, another in the Weeping Peninsula, another in the Farum area. It was more like, this is the god of smithing, this is the god of death, that's the god of order. But then most of them were killed off by the Gloam-Eyed Queen and her apostles, leaving something of a power vacuum. If one god remained, they might claim to be the only god, and could generally be uncontested. That is, assuming it usually takes the power of one god to keep another in check. Of course, that one god would themselves have to survive the Gloam-Eyed Queen's hunts. Her fate is not exactly clear, although she was defeated at the hands of Malekith. What's the story there? I have some ideas. One more interesting detail is that the Gloam-Eyed Queen was said to have been an Empyrean chosen by the Fingers. Now, this is only hearsay, so it's possible it's not accurate, but people had at least some reason to believe it. Furthermore, the Apostles were once said to have served destined death. So there are these interesting interconnections to Greater Will, Elden Ring, Two Fingers type stuff. Malekith is, of course, Marika's shadowbound beast, and especially if the destined death connection is to be believed, it shows that there was a changing of the guard, from the Gloam-Eyed Queen's reign of terror to Marika's Golden Order. After all, the Golden Order was formed by confining destined death. At least Enya says so. So how did all these people interact in the distant past? I think it all ties together if we bring in one more element. This is the Nox, or more specifically, the pre-banishment Nox civilization, who perhaps were called by a different name at the time. Nox clothing item descriptions tells us that the Nox, or Proto-Nox, somehow pissed off the Greater Will and got banished underground. Now they live in so-called eternal cities. What exactly was the nature of this sin and punishment? Nox have quite a record of attracting unwanted attention. From the Remembrance of the Natural Born, we learn that Astel once destroyed an eternal city and took away their sky. Does this refer to the same event as their banishment underground? That could be described as taking their sky away, but I don't think so. I think Astel was a completely unrelated calamity. That happened later and did not relate to the Gloam-Eyed Queen. So what did these Proto-Nox do to anger the Greater Will? I believe it was the Fingerslayer Blade. It's said to be able to harm the Greater Will, a difficult concept to imagine, but it seems well substantiated that it can harm the Two Fingers. Apparently the Two Fingers are otherwise extremely hard to kill. They're a contact point between the Greater Will and the Lands Between. Actually, I wonder whether they're especially tied to the Greater Will in particular, or if they more generally serve the purpose of connecting outer gods to terrestrial affairs. After all, Fingers supposedly had a hand in the Gloam-Eyed Queen's life. Well, that's only hearsay, so maybe inaccurate. I don't have firm convictions about that yet. But in any case, clearly the Two Fingers are part and parcel of at least some god's influence over the Lands Between, and if they're so hard to kill, they seem a bit godly themselves. Since we know the Gloam-Eyed Queen exclusively as a devotee of god-slaying, it makes sense to me that she would want to get into finger-slaying as well. It's because of this connection that I believe she belonged to the pre-banishment Proto-Nox civilization. When she caused the forging of the Fingerslayer Blade, and maybe even its use, the Greater Will just had to take action, against her and the people around her. This was the ire of the Greater Will. And how exactly did the Greater Will punish the Gloam-Eyed Queen? I believe it sent Marika at her. Marika, another Empyrean, and especially her beefy shadowbound beast Malekith, were able to defeat the Apostles and their queen. But what is this about banishment underground? Marika doesn't really seem like the banishing type. If her war against the Fire Giants is any indication, there shouldn't be Nox to speak of anymore, since Marika would have tried to exterminate their ancestors entirely. But escaping underground seems like a great way to escape the Greater Will's influence. I think Marika simply couldn't wield much power away from the light of the Erdtree, so the Nox escaped her wrath by going underground. In this view, their banishment wasn't really the goal, but it was the outcome. Light in general, and line of sight to the Erdtree, seems connected to the power of Marika's magic and describes the limits of the Greater Will's influence. For example, the Nox Mirror Helm can ward off the Greater Will, seemingly by just reflecting light. Another example may be the Shaded Castle in House Marai. It's in a valley and somewhat shaded from the Erdtree, even named after this fact. This could explain why the people there are often sickly. They're not properly exposed to the healthy, life-giving rays of the Erdtree's warm glow. So the people associated with the Gloam-Eyed Queen fled underground and eventually, if not already, were known as the Nox. I believe they created what is called the Nameless Eternal City around Deeproot Depths. It was only later that this city attracted Estelle, who then destroyed it, leveling it with his meteors. He then took away the city's false night sky. These are the stars we see when fighting him, and also above Nokron and Nokstella, but not above the Nameless City. I think these two twin cities were founded in the aftermath, as the Nox fled their devastated home. I speculate that Estelle was attracted to the Black Moon, some lost entity mentioned in the Moon of Nokstella item description. This moon guided countless stars, and maybe Estelle ended up being one of them. This Black Moon is attributed to Nokstella in particular, however, but I think that's because some artifact of it, such as the talisman, was carried away by the fleeing Nox to Nokstella. This was one of their civilization's treasures. The other was the Fingerslayer Blade, which was instead whisked away to the other new city, Nokron. Now, the Fingerslayer Blade is said to have been born of a corpse. It does look quite similar in design to the Sacred Relic Sword, which is seemingly created right before our eyes from the body of Ratigan. So I believe that story about the Fingerslayer Blade. Who died to create it? This is very speculative, but I wonder whether it may have been the person who used to sit in the empty throne in the town of Celia. This is a strangely above-ground Nox settlement. Perhaps the people there were distinctly not allies of the Gloam-Eyed Queen, largely because she'd killed their god in order to forge her new finger-slaying dagger. To add some more spice to the proceedings, I wonder if the Gloam-Eyed Queen may have been the daughter of that very god. As I previously speculated, it seems Empyreans are likely the children of vessel gods, so maybe the Gloam-Eyed Queen was supposed to be the next generation, a pure expression of her parents' outer god patron. Maybe that patron was even the Greater Will, but I think a different outer god ended up with much more influence over the Gloam-Eyed Queen instead. Obviously, some sort of death-related god. By the way, this could also help make some sense of Melina. It's very plausible that Melina herself is also an Empyrean. Because of this, she could channel an outer god. I think she ends up channeling that same death-related outer god, which helps explain her obsession with destined death. In other words, Melina is a different person from the Gloam-Eyed Queen, but they're similar in a lot of ways, because the same outer god channeled through both of them in two different eras. How did Marika get the Elden Ring in the first place anyway? A fairly straightforward answer is that she got it from the Gloam-Eyed Queen. That would further support the idea that the Gloam-Eyed Queen herself took it from her parent, themselves a god, and previous vessel for the Elden Ring. But I'm not sure. I could see the Gloam-Eyed Queen as a figure who tried to rid the lands between of godly power, rather than hoarding it for herself. Maybe she never had the Elden Ring, and the power of death was just something generally out there in the world. That is, until Marika concentrated and sealed it. So how else could Marika have gotten the Elden Ring then? Did the Gloam-Eyed Queen's parents have it? Maybe Marika participated in the ritual for creating the Fingerslayer Blade and got the Elden Ring that way. Maybe she was even a relative of the killed god, the Gloam-Eyed Queen's own sister, so transferred by inheritance. That would contradict my earlier musing that Marika had no special heritage, but I'm not so precious about it. But, again, maybe the Elden Ring had nothing to do with the Gloam-Eyed Queen at all. As I said, I think there could have been many various gods around in that era, possibly each with their own Empyrean vessels. Maybe the Greater Will's vessel god, Vessel of the Elden Ring, was some effectively anonymous schmuck at the time who got unceremoniously killed in some god hunt. At that point, maybe the Elden Ring had nowhere to go, and lingered uneventfully. Perhaps Marika just happened to find it one day, like some sort of furtive pygmy. Again, when I say this, I'm envisioning a very different age compared to recent Lands Between history. This was an age of many various gods and lords, each individually not necessarily all that noteworthy, largely forgotten to the mist of time. Marika's monotheistic order would only encourage blurring this past, especially once fundamentalism came to the fore. But it's the Gloam-Eyed Queen who really set the stage for this by killing off so many gods. Marika was just someone crazy enough to take on the mantle of godhood in that kind of environment. In fact, maybe she removed destined death from the Elden Ring and made it into Malekith's sword before ever facing off against the Queen and her apostles. This may have been a very innovative move at the time, and it would have seriously hampered the Gloam-Eyed Queen's abilities. In this light, Marika and Malekith's success wasn't based on combat prowess, but rather clever manipulation of magical forces. Now, it is known that the source of the Apostles' power was sealed away only after their defeat by Malekith, but strictly speaking, the source of their power is the Godslayer's greatsword, not Destined Death specifically. So you could interpret this as saying that the sword was sealed away later, and indeed, it's found in a chest under a divine tower. So this isn't the most straightforward interpretation, but I'd say it flies. But surely, in whatever order it happened, the sealing of Destined Death greatly reduced the Godskin's power. I think this is hinted at in a very oblique way. The Godskins use what is called Black Flame, appropriately enough. Ranni's confidant Iji, notably, can eventually be found dead, burning in Black Flame. He's surrounded by the corpses of Black Knife assassins. How did the Godskins get involved in this? They didn't. The Black Knife assassins had stolen a piece of Destined Death and imbued their knives with some of its power. They're shown to have red-black flame effects, much like Malekith himself. This is the appearance of flames directly related to Destined Death. However, the Black Knives only had a little piece of the Rune of Death, and had to share its power among them too. So I don't think their effects would maintain their deathly nature for long after use. In other words, Iji was killed by the Black Knife assassins and burned with the red-black flame of destined death. But the deathly power of that flame, coming from such a meager source, soon leached out. And after that deathly nature had dissolved, all that was left was simply a black flame, exactly as the Godskins use. Once the death power fades, the red coloring is lost. In other words, before the Rune of Death was sealed, the Godskins also had red-black flame. The modern black flame is just the vestige that's left over after they couldn't access the full depths of their former power. This is hinted at by the way a Black Knife's flame also loses its color after a while, demonstrated by the corpse of Iji. I'd say this also hints at the idea that various magical effects changed in both power and appearance when Destined Death was sealed. This could apply to other magics besides Black Flame. Food for thought. So while I don't think the Godskins had anything to do with Iji, obviously they are found in various places throughout the lands between. Since the Gloam-Eyed Queen herself was deposed long ago, the continued presence of Godskins is interesting, but may not have that much to do with the Gloam-Eyed Queen herself. So while there may be some conclusions to draw from where modern day Godskins show up and what they're up to, I won't talk about it here and now. I will give another example, like with the death of Iji, of one place the Godskins aren't, and that's Stormvale Castle. It does have a little nook where you can find a Godslayer seal in the Godskin prayer book. The reason, I believe, has to do with Godwyn. Godwyn's strange, partly dead form was disturbing to just about everyone, but there were various attempts to fix the problem. Some tried to revive him, others want to complete his death. Surely an awkward tension between these two groups. But the group that did want to finish Godwyn off must have sought help from those Godslayers of legend, the Godskins. Somehow both Godwyn and some Godskins were brought to Stormvale Castle for the purpose of fully killing off Godwyn's still living body. The Godskins obviously like to skin gods, and in particular, they seem to like to cut off the face. So that's exactly what they did. They cut off Godwyn's face. It's still found underneath Stormvale Castle. But their efforts failed to completely kill him. Even his face grew back. So the Godskins themselves were killed and or chased off, though some of their belongings were left behind. These are the seal and prayer book that we can find. I also think their attempt to kill off Godwyn caused the strange damage to the castle. Perhaps there were bursts of destructive energy as they tried to kill the demigod, or the destruction may have been caused by Fortisax, who was within Godwyn, trying to prevent his death. Either Fortisax itself, or else some emanation of its power, burst out of Godwyn when the Godskins tried to kill him, and that could account for the gashes and holes on Stormvale's walls. Like I said, difficult tensions between those trying to revive Godwyn and those trying to slay him completely. Of course, as far as Godslayers go, there are the Godskins, but there's also Malekith, literally Death of the Demigods. So why go to the Godskins and not him? Surely the Keeper of the Rune of Death is capable of finishing the job. Well, maybe the idea of finishing Godwyn off wasn't sanctioned by Marika, so Malekith couldn't participate. Or even if it was, if what I think about the Outer God Empyrean breeding program is right, then maybe Malekith, as Marika's shadow, was designed by the Greater Will to be even more protective of Marika's children than he was of Marika herself. So maybe Malekith couldn't finish Godwyn off, even if Marika had wanted him to. But now I'm starting to get rather afield. Marika and Malekith figure into this story here mostly in that they overpowered the Queen and her apostles and hounded those Proto-Nox loyal to her deep underground. But how did this happen exactly? An interesting detail is the large body of water, sort of like a moat, between Leyndell's walls. Check out this Tarnished Archaeologist video for some more on that. I reach very different conclusions from them, but the evidence is good to take in from multiple perspectives, and in any case, they're the ones that got me thinking along this angle in the first place. The reason I bring it up is that the destroyed Nameless Eternal City seems to be directly underneath this area. So it's suggestive of the idea that the Gloam-Eyed Queen's loyal people actually lived there, and their piece of the city somehow fell underground. This doesn't seem like it could have happened due to some large-scale natural-like movement such as an earthquake, since Leyndell's walls around his hole stand just fine. In fact, they fit so snugly around the hole, you'd think they were built around it after it formed. But there are gates on both sides of the walls. Furthermore, the inner and outer gates aren't very well aligned, so it doesn't even seem like there was ever a bridge between them, which may have since fallen. No, it seems more likely that there really used to be something substantial between these walls, more city. But now there isn't. And unlike Nokron and Nokstella, the Nameless Eternal City buildings are freestanding, at least the ones that stand at all, whereas in the Twin Cities, the buildings are built into the walls and ceilings. So it's more believable the Nameless City buildings got there from above ground. And since the hole and walls around it fit so neatly, it seems inevitable that magic was somehow involved. Well, that's not too strange. Obviously the land between has magic in it. Maybe magic actually protected the walls, while some great force tore at the earth in this part of the city? But that doesn't seem like the kind of thing the Greater Will does. Plus, there's water up here in Lanedell, so the hole doesn't go all the way down, there's something solid between here and the nameless city underneath. So what I'm getting at here is that I think the Proto-Nox that live here actually teleported their entire piece of the city directly downward. That left a big hole, which later filled with water. Obviously, such mass-scale teleportation is unknown in the modern lands between, but the transporter gates we do find appear to be a Nox design, just based on how they look. So maybe they were capable of teleporting such a huge chunk of matter back in the ancient past. This is now a lost art, but this civilization has been through at least 2 devastations we're directly told about, and likely at least 1 or 2 that were not, so it wouldn't be surprising if they failed to retain the full height of their abilities over time. They escaped underground like that to flee the wrath of Marika and Malekith, themselves agents of the Greater Will, sent to punish the civilization that created the Fingerslayer blade. And that's just like the Greater Will, isn't it? It doesn't reach down out of space and reshape the Earth, it acts through agents. Vassals like the Elden Beast, vessels like Marika, shadows like Malekith. These were the punishments the Gloam-Eyed Queen brought down on herself and her people. But the story of the Nox didn't end there, and Marika's own story was just beginning. The lands between are a treasure trove of history I'd love to continue to delve into. For now, I've said plenty and more, but I will continue my investigations and hopefully come up with further interesting interpretations such as these.